then you can kick this off, I think, any time that you want.
Okay, so do we have visitors or would they be here now?
It's just a presentation. We do have some attendees as well. Yep, the only people you'll see on the screen are your central office staff and your building leaders.
Okay, perfect. So I'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for the informational question and answer meeting for the Enosburgh-Richford Unified Union School District. If I got that right, that's a mouthful. I forget every time. So I just want to let everybody know this is a webinar format in order to allow for a higher number of visitors to participate. Attendees, you do not have to worry about muting yourselves or turning off your camera, as Zoom automatically has done that. The chat function is disabled, but we do have a question and answer option, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. During this meeting, there'll be natural pauses and an opportunity at the end for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question and answer at any time. Panelists will read questions out loud and it will be answered to the best of our ability. Once the question is answered, everyone will be able to see what the question was. We'll be answering all questions live so that they will be picked up on the meeting recording. Now I will turn it over to Polly Rico, who will present on the articles of the town meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. Where are we? Share screen. And let's see. Hold on. Hold horses here. Okay. And oh, sorry. Okay, so can you see that? Can you see the screen? Yeah, okay, great. So what I'm gonna do, let me go back to the beginning here. Lots of slides. I'm gonna go through this presentation, and first we're gonna take a look at the warning and what you're gonna see at town meeting on the Australian ballot. And then what I'll do is I'm going to go through some slides that actually look at the expenses and the revenue for the year and basically where the numbers came for that made up our proposed budget. And we'll stop for questions along the way. So I'll cue you when it's time to ask those questions. And then we're going to take a look at the mailer that went out to you and just kind of go through line by line and let you know how those numbers were calculated and what they mean, because it can be kind of confusing. And then so that you get a clear picture when it comes time to vote on the budget, what you're actually voting on. And then yeah, I think that's what we'll do tonight. So we'll start with this first slide, which is the seats that are open and that you'll be voting on during the Australian ballot at town meeting. And the first one is the moderator for 1 year. Currently, Pat Hayes is running for that position. Article 2 is the clerk for a 1-year term. That is Billy Joe Draper, who is running for that position. A treasurer for 1-year term, Fran Jackson is running for that. And then Article 4 is a school director for a 3-year term who resides in the town of Enosburgh. And currently the petition that was submitted is Shaylee Draper will be running for that position. And the school director for a 3-year term who resides in the town of Richford, Devin Lumbra is the member who is running for that position. Okay, so Article 5, this is the number that we'll explain throughout the slideshow, but this basically says, you can read it for yourself, but that you give the board the authority to expend that dollar amount, which is necessary to run our school. It is estimated that the proposed budget, if approved, will result in a spending of $16,774 per equalized pupil, which is a projection of a 10.5% increase from the current year, which looks scary, but I will show you that it's not as scary as it looks. So the next slide. Article 6. This article basically gives the board authority to borrow money. So this is as a result of oftentimes there's a gap in the timing of when taxes are collected and when expenses are started. In order to fill that gap, we often have to borrow money when the revenue hasn't come in yet. So this gives us the authority to do that. Article 7. Which says 8. I just realized, but it should say 7. The voters of the district authorize the board of directors to hold an audited fund balance as of June 30th. Hold on just a second here. Let's see, in a reserve fund to expend it under the control and direction of the school board, board of directors for the purpose of operating the school. So this article basically allows, is asking permission from the voters that if there is any excess funds at the end of the year, that it would give us the control to use those funds as we see fit. You know, often times if there's a surplus, sometimes it's been given back to pay down the tax rate. But when that happens, oftentimes the very next year, we end up at a deficit because we have this kind of peak and valley. This would allow us to kind of maintain more of a steady spending stream. Morgan, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or is that about capture it?
I think that covers it well, and we can circle back to that when we get to the revenue page later on.
Okay. And again, we're going to ask if you have any questions, we're going to get to a point where you can ask them. So take note if you do. So this brings us to, so that was the warrant. Those are the articles that you'll be voting on. And this is going to dive into more of the nitty gritty about expenses and revenue. So you can see this first slide is the pre-K, so pre-kindergarten page. And nothing really major jumps out here as far as, you know, there's been some increased pre-K programs across districts, I believe, and we added some pre-K, correct, Morgan? No, sorry, no, we did not. I'm thinking of the SU. Let's see. Oh, the special education, there's a decrease. You're going to see this over and over and over again, and I'm going to explain it now. The legislature passed Act 173, which changes the funding of special education. And in the past, special education expenses and reimbursements went through local budgets, and now it's being moved to this supervisory union budget. So you're going to see that it's decreasing our expenditures and our revenue on the local budget side. So with this right here, with the special education direct instruction, you can see that that is a decrease, and that is why. Okay, elementary. So the elementary, again, there's that special education decrease. Again, it's because of Act 173, which puts that money through the supervisory union budget and not the local budgets. You're also going to see a pretty big decrease on the guidance and health. Some of these positions are now being grant funded. So there's that decrease there. So decreases in expenses obviously are good, and you can see there's a bunch of them. Same thing with regular education. Some of those guidance health services are being grant funded. And then again, there's that pretty significant decrease in expenses in special education. And then, and all of these slides, these lines are in your booklet, that your town booklet, your annual report. Okay, next is secondary. Here we go. Oh, sorry, secondary. This is the tech center. And the direct instruction, this change here is due to some tuition, transportation, and again, so you can see there's really not a whole lot of movement here, other than some decreases. And this is the regular education. Some direct instruction. This are tuition payments. So I don't know if you were at last year's informational meeting, but I'll explain it again. Due to a change in accounting practices, we had to show a paying out of tuition to Cold Hollow, but you'll also see a paying in an increase in the revenue side. So it's a bit of a wash, but we still have to indicate that we are paying out some money. But this is a decrease in this direct instruction. And then again, again, there's that decrease in the special education line. The central services, you can see that's a pretty big increase. And this is due to the supervisory assessment, due to food services and transportation, that increase there, or a good chunk of it is due to that. So first, I guess, before we jump into the revenue, I'll pause for a second and ask, are there any questions regarding the expenses? I know I went through that pretty quickly.
There are no questions in the queue yet, but I wonder if now would be a good time for me to do a little bit of a deeper dive in Act 173, because I know the board's heard that a lot, and Michelle Taberge can back me up if I need it, and maybe go back a couple of slides to get to the high school budget right there. So Act 173 was passed a few years ago. In theory, it's going to be implemented on July 1st, although there is still some discussion in the legislature about delaying its implementation for another year. I think right now the smart money is on them letting it go through on July 1. What this law did, among other things, was change both how special education services are delivered and also how they are funded. So in the current system that we're in now, the supervisory union gets a relatively small grant, roughly based on our population. And then we track our special ed expenses through the year, and we get a reimbursement for those expenses over that grant. That's roughly about 56 cents to the dollar. So again, the soon to be old scheme is that the more money you spent on special ed, the more reimbursement you got. And so it was basically, roughly a 1-to-1 share with the state. The local districts were also allowed to do that. So paraeducators in all the schools in ARU would track their time, and to the extent that they were spending their time providing special ed services, the district would get a little bit of reimbursement from that. The changes to the funding formula going forward are, instead of that reimbursement model, each supervisory union in the state is going to get what's called a census block grant. So it's going to be a chunk of money based on the number of kids they have in all of their schools. There is more flexibility in how to spend that, but to the extent we spend more or less on special ed, that census block grant is not going to change. The other big change for the local budgets, and what you're seeing through a lot of the pages here, are that it appears we will not be able to get any revenue at the district level. So whereas in the past, those special ed paraeducators at your 4 schools to the extent they spent $100,000, we would get $50,000 back from the state for them. They are now going to be treated all as regular ed paraeducators unless they're moved to the supervisor union. So on this slide in front of you, you'll see that the special education expenses are dropping by $750,000. That's that third line from the bottom. That is because all of those paraeducators will no longer be considered special ed. And they've been moved up into that first line, that line that's going up 872,000. So they're all reclassified as general ed paraeducators. So you'll see those changes throughout the budget. Expenses moving from special ed to regular ed. And then when we get to the section on revenue, you'll see that the revenue for those special ed costs is going away, and that's because it's all going to the supervisory union. And if Polly, if you'll go 2 slides forward, you'll see that special education assessment has dropped by almost $500,000, and that's a function of that revenue being held at the supervisory union, and so we don't have to bill as much back to the districts to recoup those costs. That is what we know right now in terms of the special ed funding. It's been very difficult to get some solid numbers out of the Agency of Ed, and we didn't have really much before we had to warn budgets, and that's tied to the Act 46 merger and Sheldon moving into our supervisory union and whether we were getting to count those kids in terms of our block grant. And so I think that that's still a little bit of a moving target. After we warned the budgets, I think we got some good news on that. And so we're hopeful that we'll get through this legislative session without any major changes to that law or the implementation timeline.
Any questions pop up in the chat?
Not yet.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So this is the revenue side, and as Morgan was just talking about, you can see there are pretty significant decreases in that. So the other revenue, the other revenue, so these are the special ed fundings that have decreased in the revenue because it's not coming into our local budget. It's going to be going into the SU budget. This decrease rate here, this other revenue, due to the surplus we had last year, we did not claim that surplus this year. So that is revenue that we did not have or we're not anticipating in this current proposed budget. Okay. So this is the mailer that people received. And again, so that warning, let's see, that second slide that I showed you, that in the warning, it's basically asking the voters to give the board authority to expend this number right here. And so the slides we've just gone through that show you the expenses and how we came about those. Is this line right here. So this is what it takes to basically run our buildings. And this is what the board has the most control over, because as you can see in those lines, it has to do with, direct instruction, salaries, benefits, grounds. So that's this number right here. So next, I showed you that revenue slide, which I'll just back up a second. That slide, right? The money that's coming in. And you can see that there is a decrease. And we've just talked about the decrease in the special ed revenue, along with that, that surplus revenue that we're not anticipating. So that there's a decrease in that revenue. So you take your expenses and you subtract your revenue, and that gets you this number that equals education spending. And then you take this number and you divide it by your equalized pupils. And so you can see we're up 2.22. So you take your number of kids, the pupils that you have. And so you take your education spending and you divide it by the number of kids, And that gets you this number, equals per pupil education spending. This number is also on your warning. And remember, I tipped you to that 10.5%, no, 10.56% increase. And I said that looks like a scary number, but you can see the change is really $1,597. So this is, it looked scarier than it actually is, but this is that number. And then you divide that by the dollar yield, and the dollar yield is set by the legislature. And so we really have no control over this line. And so you take your per pupil education spending, you divide it by the dollar yield, and it gets you the equalized residential school tax rate. And you can see from last year, we're down 3 cents. So that would be great news if this is where we stopped, but it's not. So we're going to keep going. But you can see, like, fiscally, we're in a pretty good place compared to last year. So next comes the common level of appraisal. Did I get my acronym right? Common level of appraisal, right? Yes, okay. So this basically is set by the housing market, right? Property values. And as we have heard that property values are going up all over the state, Enosburg and Richford are no different. So how this works is when property values go up, your CLA goes down. And when your CLA goes down, your tax rate increases. So as a result of the lowering of the CLA, it increases Enosburg's tax rate by 5 cents. And now these are current projections. It might change slightly when your actual tax bill comes out, but if we're doing the numbers we have at this moment, that's what you would have. And the same for Richford. Property values went up, CLA goes down, which increases Richford by 5 cents as well. So that's the mailer. And so you can see these numbers, like I said, the ones from the warrant is the expenses that you give us the authority to expend this amount of money. You also give us the authority to charge this per pupil, or to have this per pupil education spending. So I also want to, so this per pupil, right, the one that increased by 10.56%, which was really $1,597. Here is a grid that shows you, this is last year, just to be clear, this is last year's education per pupil spending. And you can see Enosburgh-Richford's right here at the bottom. Statewide average is here. And then you can see how other schools in the county compare. And you can see that our per pupil spending is towards the bottom. Now, like we just said, that has increased, but that is probably the case with every other district in our county as well. These are pie charts that actually break down the information we just gave you. So if you like to look at it visually, this is what it looks like. And so you see through the general fund, you can see the majority of the expenses are direct instruction, regular education. And then you can see visually where our other spending is going. Morgan, I see there's a question.
Yeah, and before we go to that, maybe hop back to that revenue page again. Yeah, there you go. Just want to make sure that people are understanding how the use of fund balance works from year to year. So I'm happy to talk about that, or Lynn, if you want to get into that.
I don't mind, actually. So I think that, whenever we have a year where we have additional money at the end of a school year and we make the decision to apply that to the next year, it creates, it is a good thing in terms of tax rate, because that money actually serves to buy down your tax rate in that year. So it's a good thing, and it could end up being a bad thing in the next year, because so if the following year you don't have an equitable amount of money that you can set aside as additional revenue, at the end of the year, then you end up in kind of a deficit spending place. And that's what we're seeing here, is we had this much excess revenue at the end of the previous year that we were able to apply onto this year's budget, which reduced tax rates. But we don't have that revenue this year because our spending was pretty on the money this past year. So we essentially start in the hole by that amount of money before we build the budget. What did I do, Morgan?
I understood it.
Mm,
And then if you'll go, I guess maybe to the tax rate page, one before that, I'll read this question. And I think there are a couple of different answers to it from different people. So the question reads, if I am reading this all correctly, spending is increasing, that is expenses, and revenue from grants, et cetera, is also increasing, but there's a shortfall or differential between the numbers, resulting in a small increase in tax burden for taxpayers. My question is, why can we not reduce rather than increase spending, or at least restrain spending increases such that they are more than offset by increased revenues? It seems to me that almost $17,000 per pupil is more than a comparable private education would cost. So there are a few questions in there. And on this page, just want to point out that first line is the budgeted expenses. So that 20 million figure is the number that the board is asking the voters for approval of. That increase is actually less than 1%. So from just a pure budget point of view, to me, that feels like that's level funding a budget, especially when we're looking at health insurance costs going up 10%, in addition to salaries generally increasing from year to year. What you're seeing on that next line is a pretty significant drop in local and grant revenue. And so that is, it's some of those special ed grants that we've talked about. It's our prediction for high school tuition coming in to the two high schools. And that number is actually decreased by 20%. And it's more that decrease in revenue that's driving the increase in the ed spending, and then so the per pupil ed spending. That 16.7, I certainly understand the sticker shock with that. I think, Polly, if you go to the next page again with that graph, you'll see where we are landing in terms of the rest of the state. And this is last year's numbers, or the budget year that we're currently in, because that's the most recent set of numbers. But we are below the county average consistently and below the statewide average. I don't know if Lynn or if any of the other leaders want to talk about any other general areas where we're seeing increases, but certainly salaries and those benefits costs are big drivers. And at the same time, we've been able to keep the expense side down to under 1%.
I think one of the things that I would just like to point out is the needs that we're seeing reflected in our schools. And when we look at that spending plan, as Morgan pointed out, we're consistently spending far less per pupil than our neighbors. I think that one of the things that might not be visible for those not in education is the increase in the amount of mental health services that we're having to embed within our local education spending plans. And part of that has to do with increased need, and another part of that also has to do with the decrease in the amount of mental health supports and services that are available to our schools to access outside of the public school system. So I think that that's one of the drivers of this, of some of the increases, is what we've had to embed within our local education system.
Are there any other questions, Morgan?
There are none yet posted.
Okay, so here's another graph that not only, this was a broader view on the general fund. This breaks it down even further, which then you can see, as Morgan was talking about, those salaries and health insurance. That's a pretty big chunk. And then other benefits as well. Another pretty large chunk is the other services. Yeah. Next, so that brings us to the end of the presentation, but you can see the Enosburg residents will be voting on March 1st by Australian ballot at the Emergency Services Building, and Richford residents will be voting at the Richford Town Hall. Those polls are open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Again, Tuesday, town meeting day, March 1st. So that's the end of the presentation. So we would definitely, I'll stop sharing here, open it up for any questions that you may have on the budget.
Not seeing any more posted, and I guess, Kevin, I'll leave it up to you how long you want to stay on. And you're muted.
I said we can give it another 20, 30 seconds to make sure nobody is still typing, which I clearly took that 20 or 30 seconds because I was muted. Oh, we have one pop up, I think I saw.
Okay, yeah, there is one. What is the average salary increase for a teacher in our school system? We are actually currently negotiating with our teachers, as is, I believe, everyone in Franklin County. We've had one meeting so far with the union, so we're not close to a place where I think I could say where we're going to land. I don't know if any of the board members, I don't think any of the other board members here are on the negotiations team. Lynn, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that I think the only thing that I would add to that is we don't know where we're going to land there, but I think one thing that it's important for the public to know where we are with our staffing is that we've been really taking a look at our staffing levels over the last 4 years, and what we're experiencing is a real staffing shortage in public education. We're feeling it in particular in our little corner of Vermont. Where we are right now is we're experiencing fewer and fewer candidates every time we have a position open. And we are feeling that where we are in terms of comparison of base salaries is that we are not always very competitive with others around us in terms of being able to attract people to come to FNESU, which we're finding is having a direct impact on our students. I know we gathered data just to get a sense of, you know, how many new teachers we're seeing each year. And just for last year alone, we saw 42 teachers turnover in FNESU. And we already know that we have a significant number. Some have left partway through the year. We're at the end of 3 very trying school years. So I know this is more than what you asked, but I think it's important to be said that, you know, we're needing to really attend to our labor force and make sure that we have adequate staffing to be able to continue to operate our schools with high quality teachers in front of our students. So.
Okay, there's no other questions. We can conclude the meeting.
Nothing else in the queue.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.